the spirit of April Fools, we're talking about play today. And April Fools, if you know a little bit, it's that, playing pranks on each other and tricks, which is can be done quite poorly, but also is a way of expressing play and showing play, and being a little bit silly with each other. So that's what we're talking about today.
And before we get too much into talking about practicing and experiencing that joy of play, and sometimes not as joyous, we want to talk about one of the things that we have heard from our community a lot lately, that I think we've both experienced for ourselves and been reminded by our partners, is what's getting in the way of play, and it's technology. And so we're coming to you on a screen here, which is serendipitous, and we also know that the majority of us are spending a huge amount of time in front of a screen, whether it's a computer at work, or scrolling through your phone, or watching TV. For some, it's like playing video games. The average person is spending somewhere between 10 and 12 hours a day on a screen. And what's really interesting is that these advances in technology that are giving us these opportunities for computers and phones and tablets and all of these things provide so much benefit, and yet what they're doing when experienced in that great of a time is taking us out of real life experience and being connected and present to what is currently going on in our reality. We know the impact that screen time can have on brain development. There's been a number of studies now showing that teenagers who spend long amounts of time on screens have decreased neuroplasticity, which is the ability for our brains to develop new pathways and new messages and new stories. It's decreasing our ability to be creative, to engage in critical thinking and problem solving. So we know that there is such a role for these things, and we also know that they are so widely overused. The connection of screen time to sleep is so incredibly strong, of people who are spending more time on screens, particularly into the evening hours, having disrupted sleep, not only from the blue light that's being emitted from the screen, but also from the stimulating activity. So what we know is really important, and there's a movement towards this, is decreasing the amount of time that we're spending on screens, putting limits on maybe the apps for things like social media, so we're not just scrolling mindlessly. We don't know what it's like to be bored anymore, and from boredom and from not being tied to something can come a lot of opportunity. And I think that's where play and creativity and curiosity can really start to shine.
Absolutely, yeah. If we don't have that space of boredom, as Rachel said, then we lose some of our potential for that creativity and problem solving, and that really does lead us into the conversation around play. And there's a lot of studies that have been done quite recently around the importance of play for adults. So we think of it as definitely something that children experience, and that we really encourage in our children, is to play, because we know that it's good for their brain development. But what we also know is that as adults, we need to put value on play as well. Play is actually one of the foremost ways that we continue to develop our brains as adults. So it's not that we have new neurons that are built in our brain, but that we do develop new pathways. And play is a wonderful way to do that, because it allows us to be at a state in our nervous system where we are both activated, but also calm. So we're not in a place of fight and flight, and we're also not in a place of shut down. It's this sweet place in the middle where we're just a little bit charged up, and it's the place where we can have kind of the most excitement happen. It's usually a place where when we think about play, we're not usually anxious when we're playing. We're usually really engaged and in the moment, able to be present and to kind of try things on. And it really comes back to this space of safety, so that we feel okay to get it wrong or to fail at something, which helps us to, again, develop new pathways through our mind that help us to create new changes for ourselves and places that we want to show up for ourselves. So I think what's kind of cool is when we start to think about play, it's like, well, how do you like to play? And if you have been an adult that hasn't incorporated play into your life and that you haven't put value on it, it's not too late to start that. And you may also be already doing it in ways that you just haven't considered it yet. So one of the ways that both Rachel and I love to play is through our movement. We both really enjoy trying different movements and new paths of movements, different choreographies with movements that are familiar, and all of these ways of moving our bodies offer that sense of play. Many of you know that I have a new rebounder, and for me it's been off the hook one of the most fun things that I have done in a really long time. And it also takes a lot of coordination and balance, which again is building these new neural pathways to enhance my body's experience in the world around. So movement is one really great way. The thing with neuroplasticity or creating new neural pathways and using play is that we need to be doing it in a way that slightly challenges us. And again, it's that sweet spot of being challenged but also feeling relaxed. Yeah, so if it gets to that point where it's too competitive, or we start to go into a lot of self-judgment, then it's probably not the best place to practice play. Yeah, so we want to find a way where we feel comfortable. And the other way that that really shows up is when we do it in partnership or in relation with other people. So, if you're calling up a friend and spending time with them, doing something silly or unexpected, playing a game together is a really nice way to encourage play. Things like board games, chess, stuff like this that actually requires us to do a lot of skills with our brains. So play can be in our body, but it can also be in our minds too. So there's kind of different pathways that we can do that, depending on what our preferences are and how we enjoy play. And if you're not sure, you can also reflect on what was playful for you when you were a child, and the things that you did as a child that were fun and playful, maybe places that you want to revisit as an adult. So if you like to spend a lot of time outside as a child and build things, that might be a nice place for you to start to explore as an adult too. If you were someone who, like I was quite bookish as a child, I've spent a lot of time reading, and I love to write stories. And so definitely writing and like writing poetry or short stories right now is definitely a way that I also enjoy play as an adult. Another way that we can play is just finding silliness too, and laughter. And sometimes that requires just a little bit of a prompt. So watching some stand-up comedy is a good way to get that going, and it can really enhance your mood in the moment too. One more thing about play, I'm talking a lot today. One more thing about play is that we often equate play with fun, and it isn't always the case. Sometimes play is actually a little bit of work, right? And it can be a bit uncomfortable. And that's, again, that sweet spot of finding the edge of discomfort with your play, where you still feel safe and can kind of brush it off, and it doesn't take you into that place of fear and judgment and anxiety. But it isn't always totally fun and perfect all the time. Think about if you're trying to learn a new sport. Hi everyone. Is that it's awkward and you're like, I'm really bad at this, and it's great to be bad at something. It's so good to be bad at something, and when we practice and when we keep working on it, we get better. Yeah, and then our brains change. Right?
And that's all about creating a flow state. Like, we can probably all think of a time when we were doing an activity and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, an hour and a half has passed. And finding flow, and there's a lot of research around flow states, and it's about this perfect balance between enjoyment, so it has to be something that you enjoy doing, but also challenge, because if something is too hard, it will continue to pull you out of what that flow state is. And if something is too easy, then we can become bored of it really quickly, or we're always looking for the next thing. And so we want to, when we're thinking about play, that idea of like being bad at something, eventually over time those things start to even out a bit, and we reach that really beautiful place of flow.
So we want to hear from you. What ways are you showing up to play? How might technology be getting in the way of your play? And are you ready to make maybe a new commitment to changing that habit? We'd love to hear your experience. And yeah, drop it in the comments, reach out, send us a message. We're here for it all.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.